next session is to be moderated by Aradhana Khowala. Aradhana is Chief Executive Officer and founder of Aptamind Partners and Chair of the Advisory Board at the Red Sea Project in Saudi Arabia. Aradhana, thank you so much for joining us and participating in the conference. I know you're moderating a number of sessions over the next 3 days, so much appreciated. Please show your appreciation to Aradhana.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the last 18 months, believe it or not, apart from the global pandemic that has resulted in the death of 4.5 million people, we have also witnessed the biggest election of a lifetime, 2 insurrections, an impeachment trial, calls against racial injustice with Black Lives Matter, and calls against climate inaction. We've also had Corona beer sales crash because of wrongful brand association, and makers of Lysol issue warnings to not drink their products. And more recently, we've had airlines duct taping passengers for unruly behavior. Now, to help us grasp the twists and turns of what has perhaps been the craziest year in not just hospitality industry's history, but the world's history, we have just the man. Everyone knows Samih Sawiris as the chairman of Orascom Hotels and Development. They have a huge portfolio, 8,000 rooms, 1,000 more in the pipeline, spread far and wide between Switzerland, Morocco, UAE, Oman, and many other places. At a more personal level, Samih is often touted as the man who made the desert bloom, with reference to his Al Ghuna project in Egypt, where he pretty much created a luxury resort destination from scratch. And more recently, he's now called the man who launched an ultra-luxury ski destination in the sleepiest, perhaps most economically depressed village in Andermatt, Switzerland. I have enormous respect for Samih because he just has this passion to go after the biggest, most bold challenges. And if everything that he's doing is not enough, he's a phenomenally talented pianist who's prepping for his inaugural concert as we speak. Please welcome the most famous son of Andermatt, who's now also an honorary citizen of Uri, the first foreigner ever in the history of Switzerland to achieve that. Samih, please welcome on stage.
Thank you.
Before we get started, a bit of a warm-up, Samih. If I ask you to think of 5 words that come to mind as you reflect back on the last 18 months, what would it be? Very quickly. Very happy to do a ping pong as well. You say one, I say one. We can go back and forth.
Uncertainty.
Change.
Lack of vision of governments.
Hope.
Hope is standard. If you don't have hope, you wouldn't be sitting in this room.
That is true.
You'd be probably sitting at home somewhere.
Anything else that comes to mind?
Opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of surprises.
I have to say, you're incredibly polite and calm and composed, because I would have said merd. Really messed up. Shocking.
There's also a lot of sudden change. The evolution that took place because of the pandemic in many aspects of life are there to stay. And they will impact the way we live, actually. For example, I can tell you that a few years ago, if you told your boss, I'll be working this week from home, he's going to look at it very negatively. If you do it twice, he's probably going to think about a replacement. Today, it's absolutely common practice. And that will stay.
Yeah.
This home office or like office being a mobile institution, not necessarily a place where everybody has to go from 9 to 5, will gradually disappear. And that will impact office space and will impact investment in this sector, will impact travel. like all the business hotels will suffer forever.
Right.
Because you can't go to your boss and say, I have an important meeting in Paris, I need to go and meet a client or someone, and think you're going to get away with it, because you actually, even before the pandemic, never really needed to go to Paris, but it was much more fun to fly to Paris on the cost of your company, or to, even if you own the company, it was a good excuse to go to Paris. Who doesn't want to go to Paris? Now it will look a bit odd if you didn't do a Zoom call.
Right.
So that is there to stay.
Great.
And it has changed a lot also the perception of second homes, from being the number 2 priority to being actually in many cases the number 1 priority, because now that the second home, which is usually a much nicer place than your first home, can also be your office, this is going to be a trend that we have already seen. I mean, we are making money this year for the first time in a long time, thanks to exactly that. I mean, real estate has been booming in many, many places where this second home concept, becoming a first home as well, became much more popular.
I have to ask you one step higher, perhaps, and I want to pick up on what Khadija said. The global GDP today is higher than it used to be in 2019. But the contribution...
No. This is not a good statement, because it's not true.
What I'm trying to say is, but the contribution of travel and tourism's contribution to GDP has fallen. It's halved. My question is, when the global financial crisis happened in 08, 09, the entire government machinery came together to bail out the banks because they were considered too big to fail. COVID was not our fault. We actually employ more people than banking, and we create more equitable wealth. So it's not bankers getting richer, right? But the reaction of the governments have at best been questionable.
I wouldn't generalize. I would definitely not generalize. There's been exceptions. I would name one. Number 1 actually would be Switzerland, and number 2 would be Germany. These 2 countries actually took care of their travel business much more than actually people in the sector would have believed possible. So wouldn't generalize. But just to kill one statement, because I really think that we measure GDP as a sign of success when we, and disregard where the source of the growth is. Like the lady was saying before, that Egypt surprisingly did great. Well, look at the net indebtedness of Egypt before the pandemic and now. And this is the case practically all over the planet. This so-called GDP growth is, which usually everybody says, I have 4% growth, yeah, fantastic. But if it's coupled with like enormous mountains of debt, one should actually be much more skeptical about this GDP growth.
Right.
So
fair enough.
Not a very
but it still raises the question, we as travel and tourism always say that we have to have a seat at the table. And my question is, how do we get taken more seriously as a sector by governments globally?
Well, don't forget, governments everywhere practically don't like to help rich people and don't like private sector. They tolerate them, they embrace them, but it's not like we're the favorite people at the table. A bank is usually not a person's bank, so it's much easier to sit with Deutsche Bank and bail them out with 100 billion than to come and collect 100 investors from this room and give them 2 billion, because there's always the risk that this might make them richer. And this annoys governments usually, if they have the worry that their contribution to the industry might ultimately help individuals that, private people with a lot of money, they don't exactly invite charitable moods from government, and that's why you see them much easier handling a banking crisis like 2008, where you sit with 100 banks, they're all CEOs, they're not owners. How much do you need? So much, done, finished. Nobody will blame them that Mr. X, Mr. Y, all of a sudden managed to buy a private jet because he got bailed out with the 300-400 million by government Y. and these governments would suffer tremendously in the next round of elections because they would be like cronies to the business community, blah, blah, blah. So that is why we have a much bigger problem, and we are fragmented, and we are really, in terms of numbers, much bigger, and not even in the same industry, even though we all run under the same title.
Right.
I mean, airlines are not like, let's say, people who are renting houses, not like limousine service, not like bus service, not like airlines. All of these entities are all put together as if it's the same industry when it's not really.
Right. I also want to pick up another thing which I heard from Khadija, which was about the role of the private sector. And Minister Balala from Kenya gave an introductory note when Jonathan was speaking. And I want to ask you, what is your view on the vaccination program, especially with regards to the inequity in the vaccination? Because one of the things this has thrown up is how we are so interconnected as a sector that none of us are good until all of us are good. And what is the role of the private sector in that? Or what could be the role?
No, we're not allowed to have a role. I mean, in most countries, I mean, even in England and in Switzerland, in many countries, governments kept a monopoly on the distribution of vaccines, on determining which vaccine is good enough for you and which is not, changing their minds all the time. AstraZeneca is accepted, all of a sudden it's not accepted. The Chinese, they don't know what they're doing, so you don't take their vaccine seriously, even though, I mean, until now we've had to take the Chinese seriously in practically everything, so I don't know why all of a sudden they're not capable of producing a vaccine, you know, probably just because it's all politics. I mean, the amount of politics played in the world today with this vaccine and the whole corona business is a joke. I mean, I can tell you a fantastic example. I was in Zurich, I was supposed to go to the USA, and currently the USA does not allow anybody from Europe to travel to America. And, but you have to have been 14 days outside the European Union and then you can.
Yeah.
Now look at my schedule. I went to Egypt, Oman, the Emirates, then Morocco, and then I can go to the States. So I'm considered much safer for the USA after doing this huge tour of all these countries than flying from Zurich. Not even, let's say, somewhere else in Europe. From Zurich, it's not allowed because it's very dangerous, you know. Of course, this is shows you how much politics are involved, you know.
Samih, you have a unique ability to pick projects. When you start, people call you crazy. When you finish, they give you an award. So how are you
Not only
looking?
that, you know, that's all fine, but I love it when they tell me, yes, I always knew this is going to be a good project. and I've heard this so many times that it stopped annoying me.
So tell me, how are you looking at this crisis? What have you done that you wouldn't have before? And with all the paradigm shift that we have seen, are you a bit careful? Are you thinking some things might change, so I need to be looking at things differently than I have?
Well, I tell you one thing, the real estate market, especially in second homes, has benefited from Corona and will continue to benefit. So whoever is doing development will benefit. If you are in the hotel, in the business hotel sector, you better start devising new ideas because they will continue to suffer more and more. Because as also people get used to this Zoom business, let's say the younger generation that doesn't really care to have a handshake and sit down and eyes to eyes and all this old crap of ours, travel for business will almost diminish. So if you don't have a hotel that is in a cool place where there's tons of things to do other than business, you're going to have a tough time.
I will ask you also, because you have a globally diversified business, how are you looking at the supply chain? Now, the reason I ask is recently there was a case where there was one worker in a port, which is the third busiest port in China, who got a case of COVID, and the port was shut down for 2 weeks, which disrupted the entire supply chain. We also had the incident in the Suez Canal. That had nothing to do with COVID. That was just bad driving, actually awful driving. But there was disruption in the entire supply chain. So as businesses and global businesses, are you thinking differently and planning differently?
No, I mean, especially our business, we're used to crisis. I mean, anybody who does every time I see a business plan or a feasibility study that does not include one disaster year, I basically don't even continue reading it, because this to me sounds like fiction. You know, and anyway, in our business, feasibility studies and forecasting the future in itself is a joke. You know, so it's the lady before me said something about I'm not going to predict the stock market, and I can tell you in our business you cannot predict anything. I mean, 30 years later, I can tell you the amount of times we expected the disasters and we received amazing results. We expect, like, who would have said that thanks to Corona, we're going to post profits this year? You know, that anybody would have said so, I wouldn't have even answered him.
I have to let you go. We have run out of time, but not before I ask you, Samih, in the next 5 years, what would you be disappointed if you haven't done?
First of all, I have to finish this, since you referred to this talent that I don't have, actually, because I only started 5 years ago. So I still have about 2 years to get to the level of performing. So this is my top priority right now. Then I have 2 projects in mind that I want to bail out, basically because I'm not the youngest anymore. I cannot start greenfield projects anymore. I want to see them thrive, and they usually thrive after 10, 15 years. And I don't want to be 78 when people start telling me what an amazing project, and I don't want them to start telling me now, this is crazy, why are you doing this at your age, blah, blah, blah. So I have 2 projects that I think that for many, many reasons they were not successful, but can be made successful in much less time than greenfield. So I think greenfield and I will part ways for now.
Thank you so much, Samih, and good luck for that. Jonathan, your events always have drama and entertainment. You have a pianist ready for his inaugural performance. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.